Welcome to the Humanist Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Stearns. Join us on a journey where we unravel the intricacies of workplace dynamics. Good morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the Humanist Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Stearns. And as the podcast talks, as the intro says, it's all about flourishing and trying to understand really what flourishing is a little bit. We'll cover some of that over the course of the show, not always in every episode and not always trying to come up with a definition. I think it's great when I look and I try to research the definition. What is flourishing? And there are as many definitions as there are pages in Google. And so it's a beautiful thing, but I think it's really is about, so talking with Chris, our next guest, it's really about having some purpose at work, and you know, whether or not that's your purpose is a different story, but being part of something and having the ability to really embrace it and to find yourself as kind of a human. Chris, welcome to the Humanist. Thanks for being a guest. Thanks for taking time out of your day.
Yes, thank you, Ken. I'm glad to be on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Chris, you're an HR strategist. You've got quite a bit of time under your belt as an HR executive, you know, startups and ongoing concerns, and you ended up now you're doing consulting for firms around the country or locally.
Yes, that's right. Around the country and locally, our tagline is we help companies operationalize revenue through a people and culture lens. And so we come in and address maybe how companies are succeeding and maybe where they're not and how they maybe anticipated to succeed and what their hopes and dreams are and figure out maybe where the communication bottlenecks are in that organization to help them get to the next level.
I love how we spent a good bit, most of our 15 minutes offline talking about communications and how that worked, the dynamic of that in an organization. Well, to kick things off and a little bit of you know, I never asked somebody to do something that I haven't done before. So I've got this jar full of questions. We open up the show by the host pulling one out from from deep in the middle here. I get to do this after watching. I traveled the country, interviewed 326-ish people in 96 cities. And one of the things I never did was I never pulled from the jar. So this is I always let that, it was sacrosanct for me. It was the guest jar, and it was really something I didn't want to touch. And only, okay, that's a question there's a lot of questions in here that I would choose, but that I can't say why I'm not going to pick that one. It's not filtered it's not safe for work is what we could say. Okay, here we go. Here's mine. What's one thing you look forward to in life as you get older? So this is, for me, interesting. I am older. I'm 62 now, so I'm older. So, as I get older, it's all perspective. And I interviewed a gentleman 70 and just jam packed. You'd never know they're 70. They're like 30 years old in their own mind. Absolutely a go-get, just drinking from the fountain of youth,
Wow.
In the gym, doing, CrossFit, hitting personal record goals of the amount of weight they lift and everything else. And I think for me, as I get older, this is one thing I really look forward to more and more is I found myself and I found who Ken Stearns is. And I think I found the area of my purpose, or at least I've been able to gather up my experience and find a way to make it valuable to not just myself, but hopefully some other people. So I think, just continuing to explore who I am as a person, what I'm doing here on this earth, and, how can I make it a great place for myself and other, people that cross my path.
That's great.
Not a bad way to start the day. A little bit of reflection on who you are and what you're supposed to be doing in life, Chris.
That's right.
How did you end up in HR? How did because I've heard this is a funny. I'm going to use a potential client of mine, and I'd call him really a friend, Roger Zamora,
Sure.
and he works at a company in the Bay Area, and he said, "Well, Ken, HR is like a puppy dog. You don't choose HR chooses you."
Oh my gosh, that's such a great because I get asked all the time, how do I get into HR? And I think about it, that should be a simple answer, and it's just not. I grew up in the Portland metropolitan area. I moved down to the Bay Area when I was I just turned 20 years old, and
Okay.
was finishing college in San Francisco, and took a job at a company called Paychex, and
Whoa, back in the day.
was back in the day. This was 1997 or 96, something like that, and yeah, I worked at Paychex for a while, and stopped college for a bit, and because I thought, oh, I'm making money now, and as a young person, I thought, oh, this is paying the rent, and little I know the Bay Area was going to just explode, right? So I stopped college for a while, and I remained in the payroll space and accounts receivable, and bounced around the Bay Area, the companies like Electronic Arts and Gap Inc. and other fun companies, and eventually moved back to the Portland metropolitan area, uh, and took a job with Paychex again, because that was I met my wife in the Bay Area. We got married. We have a child. We had a child, and got priced out basically, and moved back
Okay.
to Portland. And I realized that without a degree, I was hitting a glass ceiling. And Paychex had a very generous tuition reimbursement program. So this is I know I'm taking a scenic route here, but I promise I'll get to your question. I looked around at Paychex, what the coolest position in that organization was, because when I joined Paychex around 1998, again, the economy just went downhill, and I thought Paychex was going to be a jumping pad position for me, and I'd go find another job. But the economy went downhill, so I was relatively. The scenario was, I felt like I had to get really comfortable at Paychex, and find
Yeah.
for a little while. And I took a job as an HR consultant for that company. And the first time I'd really dove into, I'd done benefits administration, but it was the first like strategy HR role
Yeah.
that I'd been in for HR. And I was assigned 50, 60 different clients that I was meant to be there. These companies were paying quite a lot of money to have an HR consultant show up at their place and train their employees, train their managers, speak with executives about strategy. And I was
Wow.
relatively new to HR, right? So
I was going to
it
say
was,
you're such an
it was
experienced
made a lot of
strategist.
mistakes, and sitting to some really difficult conversations about what am I paying for, and and really that was me cutting my teeth in HR in a very just
Wow.
in the fire, right? And
Wow.
wrote probably 100 handbooks over the course of my 3 years there, thousands of job descriptions. I think when you write a handbook, when you write multiple handbooks for many companies
Yes.
across several cultures, company cultures, you start to understand policy development and how
Hmm.
culture plays such a huge part in how companies develop. Um, and so I learned quite a lot about HR in that role for 3 years, and was then recruited away by a company that I became the HR manager for.
Eventually, somebody would recruit you inside, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But that was my path in HR. It was sort of, uh, you know, it was, yes, you're right. HR chose me. I didn't choose HR.
It,
I didn't, that hiring manager, I had applied for the job twice, and because I became interested in, I'm an extrovert by nature, and I'm a people person. I love people,
yeah.
and that really helped guide me through my initial. People get into a position like that where they're thrown into the fire in a very challenging role that is busy and demanding. If you don't love it, you're going to quit, right?
You
I mean, it's
you were
and
going to
so
quit. Yeah.
yes, and so I think that's where, yeah, that quote, that the preamble
Uh,
you gave about that really hits home, because yeah, I think HR chose me. I could have went in a number of directions. I could have just really settled into accounting, as a junior payroll person who filed, payroll tax returns and things. I could have really, I got my bachelor's degrees in accounting, and I got an MBA, right? I could have really went kind of finance and accounting, but
yeah, you
yeah,
could have. Yeah.
HR, I think it's appropriate to say HR chose me.
It's I mean, that conversation we had, it kind of ties into that, the story you just told about really ending up and doing a hot seat job. going into all these different companies, expecting they're all looking at
Yeah,
you, the expert, even though
hot
you're
seat
fresh.
job.
You're
That's
literally
exactly
fresh off the boat, right? You're fresh
that's
into the job.
hot
You don't know
seat
what.
job. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's what it felt like. You know,
And
certainly initially, after 3 years, I really had my feet under me. But
I,
I'd say the first year, it was really, yeah, hot seat job for sure.
I would imagine after 3 years, you became you. Actually, it's hard to keep you in that job because you're too valuable.
Yes, that's right. And I think that a lot of people in roles like that, Paychex is not the only company that has a role like that. There's others, and yes, you become a bit of a commodity in the workforce,
Yeah,
and
that's
in
you get
that
snatched
space,
up.
I suppose.
You
Yeah.
get you get snatched up.
Mhm.
We talked a little bit about strategy and communications, and you mentioned the word culture you threw in there, but to
Sure.
keep it back to the conversation we had, about managers and how strategy works, and how we start, the boss comes in and says, I had especially the executive meeting on Monday morning, I just finished a great book, or I had an idea on the weekend. And
Right.
everybody everybody at the round table at the executive meeting on Monday morning, just cringes slightly because it's a new direction or it's a new
Yes.
thing.
Sure.
um and then the knock-on effect of that over months and weeks, and maybe even years of leadership like that, what happens to the managers and who's running the ship at this point? Is it the strategy, or is it the executive, or is it really still at the end of the day the managers? How do you see this communication going?
Well, it can depend. So there's nothing wrong with an executive having an epiphany and changing direction. I think I think there's this. Most people are not executives, right? Most
Yeah,
people are working in an organization under the direction of an executive. And so it's important to say that executives are human beings, right?
yeah,
They've got feelings and emotions, and they're not, it's, people, you see on social media saying, hey, leadership did, well, leadership are people, right?
right.
They're, they have emotions and feelings and thoughts and ambitions and hopes and dreams, just like everybody else. And so, but they happen to have typically a strategic skill set that allows them to
Yeah,
where they found themselves in a role where they're making some pretty some decisions that affect the lives of a
yeah,
lot of people, right? And so, just just set the I like to set that table going into this discussion
yeah. It's
because
important.
yeah, and so yes, executives. It's okay to have epiphanies. I think the one thing that that allows epiphanies to be acceptable, as companies change direction, is clarity. And
Hmm.
when an executive can communicate their strategy with clarity and intention, then they can get buy-in pretty quickly. Especially when that clarity ties together the direction of the organization. So if
Hmm.
if you're not able to articulate with clarity your strategy as an executive, it could be the best strategy in the world. You're not going to drive results. And so being able to communicate your strategy. So like I said, epiphanies are fine. You read a book and you think, oh great,
Yes.
that sounds like, oh my gosh, but if you're an executive who can speak and articulate and lead with clarity, you can have all the epiphanies in the world and people are going to follow you. People
Yeah.
are going to understand the direction they're going to, that's the biggest thing is understanding. When your VPs and your directors understand what is happening and why it's happening and how it's happening, then they're tied into that. They're gonna follow suit. Now, we talked about earlier is when that gets down to the manager level, right?
Yes.
And then the next real tricky thing with strategy when it gets down to the manager level is that strategy has to convert to tactics, right? So the manager receives the strategy, and now they have the dubious honor of uh, turning that strategy and instructing their direct reports on on their daily activities
Hmm.
that serve that strategy. That is a very difficult job. It's a huge transition.
It's super complex right there. What you just described is the most crucial part of the strategy, and it's
Yeah.
at the
I mean,
manager level, like the heroes, right? The real
yeah.
heroes
I
are
mean, there's a lot of things that happen from executive to manager. I mean, there's all kinds of other extraordinary professionals that are customer facing, so to speak, or vendor facing,
Mhm.
or alliance facing people that have a certain business acumen that maybe they would be an executive somewhere else, but they're serving a role in that
Yes.
organization. It's a heightened role, right? So there's a lot of spokes off the wheel, but I'm talking about when it gets down to the individual contributors who are actually
Yes. Yeah.
doing the daily activities that deploy the products and services of the organization. That is really difficult. That is a that is a transition from strategy to tactics that needs to happen fluidly, and often, um, I say often, but in my experience, often does not initially. It takes
Yeah.
it takes you having great managers is a luxury of organizations. Many times, you have to make your managers great, right?
Having great managers is a luxury of organizations. Great quote right there.
Hey
I,
man,
I
trade.
yeah, that's a good. I mean, that is and it's real. I think
Yeah, it is real. That's right.
um,
Yeah.
this is one of the interesting. I love this topic because I fancied myself a good strategist, and
Mm,
one of the things that I loved about it was getting down to the actual tactics.
yeah.
And I was in a business that was a sales business, and it was heavily metric driven, and so a lot of those, you convert these activities into the metrics, right? And so, then you reverse engineer it to make sure that it's going to add up to this to the overall strategic effort.
Yes, that's
And,
right.
and
Yeah, that's
and so you get down to, how many of these things do you need to do per day? And each
right.
person knew, I had 10 of these, 4 of these, 3 of these, and 2 of
Yeah,
those, and then I
it's
can
where
go
money
home.
comes from, and you're right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, then I
That's
can
how
go
you drive
home.
a
I
great
mean,
sales organization. Yeah, that's exactly right.
because eventually I'm going to win, right? The numbers, we know the numbers, and the numbers don't change too dramatically over time. Hopefully, you can get better strategies that affect the numbers differently. But yeah, that was one of my favorite things. Really getting into the brass tacks and
Mhm.
making sure that the teams knew what they had to do every day to get to move the ball forward.
Yeah, and there's a lot of little nuanced communication bottlenecks that can happen in an organization as the strategy affects different players in the company, right? And how that it's easy playing the telephone game as a kid, right? You know that things can morph and change as it goes from one ear to the next, and so it's really important to develop checkpoints in an organization to make
Yeah,
sure that the strategy is staying consistent, that the intent of the operation is staying consistent, and that's the human element of organizations is keeping people aligned, people excited about the strategy, and people tied in. And people can't be excited about things they don't understand, right? If they don't understand
Mm,
where their role plays into the strategy, it's very difficult to be an excited employee when you don't understand how your contribution makes a difference or how your contribution plays into the strategy.
you see, I mean, you get called in as a consultant now. You get called in typically, I don't imagine, when companies are doing really, really well. They're right. You're seeing
Well, hopefully not a
organizations.
lot, because that's then
Yeah,
90 that have business, right? So,
right. I mean, things are going well. I'm not calling Chris.
yeah.
Uh, I need you. I need you when, and I guess maybe, or I call you when. What does that kind of fill in the blank? When do clients
Yeah.
call you?
So for me, um, I like to be called when an organization has attempted their strategy and it's not producing the results that they thought it would, and
Yeah,
that they've tried angle after angle, and they need a trained people and culture eye to come look at the organization
Hmm.
and decide, hey, is there a people and culture problem here that we need to, and oftentimes the executive will already know, yes, there is, right?
Yeah, that's why you call it. Yeah, they know
They're
something.
astute enough to know, right, that there's a people and culture problem that they've tried to solve, or that they don't quite understand just yet, and they need somebody to come in and take a look at where the communication bottlenecks are happening, and um, where people are not tied into the vision of the organization, and how to rectify that. And that's where I come in.
What does that culture gap look like? Because we talk about corporate culture, and when there is that misalignment or miscommunication, um,
Yeah,
or a change, because culture doesn't change direction. That it's not easy to change culture. So when
yeah.
what is
I,
it?
I would say that I would say that if you're not managing your culture is managing you, and
Ooh,
it's
ooh,
that means that
ooh.
so if you're not intent, so that means you have to know what your culture, your organizational
Y-
culture is. You have to
yes,
know what that is,
yeah.
and if you don't know what that is, then we have to take a step back, right? So that's, and I'm happy to do that as well with organizations. I think I do that quite well. I start to ask, companies. You'll hear executives that maybe aren't quite as sophisticated yet in their career say something like, "Oh, values are ridiculous and they're worthless, and we don't really pay much attention to values because they don't mean anything." Well, they do, and the reason why they do is because when inevitably you
Mm,
come to a point where you need to make a very critical decision for your organization, and the business mechanics are not informing that decision well enough,
yes.
you have to
Okay.
rely on what your values are, right?
Interesting.
What are my values telling me this organization should do now, right? And so, uh, and that happens. That isn't just once in a lifetime of an organization that happens. That happens all the time,
All the
all the
time.
time. And so, if you're not directed by values in your organization, the way you make decisions, your decisions over time are going to appear erratic, right?
Oh,
They're going to
interesting.
appear, they're going to appear
Interesting.
directionless, and
Huh.
and you're going to have a very difficult time uh, pulling that together without the help of really strong, identifiable values. And so this is where the selection of values in your organization, I think, is really critical, because what you're saying when you choose values, you're saying, we believe these values are the things that will drive success for this organization. When
Yes.
push comes to shove and it's
It-
brass tacks time, these values drive success for us. This is how we choose employees. This is how we choose customers. This is how we
Interesting.
choose based on our values,
Hmm.
right? And so that's the bedrock then of your culture. And so so that gets to the ground level, what you asked, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Your culture is then that those values allow you, they equip you, then allow you, they equip
Yeah,
you
equip you.
to drive the culture with intent. And if you're not driving the culture with intent, that means every communication, every
Yes.
reminder of the activities that
Who
go,
we are, why we do what
who
we
we
do.
are, why we're doing what we're doing. We are developing a new program that serves our strategy because this program is aligned with our values, right? Everything
Yes.
we do now is born from our values and driving our culture to serve the strategy of the organization.
Oh, that's really eloquent way of saying it. I really love that. Great explanation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great explanation. And a good reminder for me. That was, as you were saying, I was going back and thinking of my own pitch deck, my own kind of for especially around the jar works and
Yeah.
doing
Well, I don't know if I can come
consulting.
up with that again, so I'm glad this is being recorded.
Hopefully it's recording. Yeah, okay, we are recording.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one. I definitely want to get we want to get that one out and pull that into 1 minute, a one
Yeah,
minute
beautiful.
slice, right?
Yeah, beautiful. That's right.
Well, it's hard. I mean, culture is a very difficult thing to understand. For me, it's always been very difficult to understand because sometimes I feel like there's two cultures: the culture of the executive team and how they lead, and almost the leader brings their own culture, right? Their own kind of flavor to stuff. And depending upon how demonstrative they are, right? What kind of role they play in the organization, the kind of organization, how much visibility they have, it can carry over quite a bit. That bit of flavor they've got can add a bit of spice to the stew. And
Yeah,
so,
that's right, and it should. And I think that is the same for every single individual in the organization. And
oh, interesting,
what I
interesting.
mean by that is, so if you were to ask somebody, if what are your values at work and what are your values outside of work? If they have two clear differences in those explanations, then they're probably in the wrong company. Um,
Sure.
they're probably in the wrong company. They probably feel a lot of stress of having to be somebody at work that they're just not naturally. And and so
Huh.
and so this is where values are very helpful in, first of all, the talent acquisition team of an organization to choose people that
Oh,
are really going to
yeah.
be organic in the organization, and where people are not. And so to your point, yes, when you define the values and culture of an organization, the hope is that the people, executives and everybody, that people really identify with those values and really feel like, yeah, those are things that I feel like I can bring my whole self to every day at
Oh,
work, you
you're
know?
speaking my language now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that I don't have to feel like I have to turn who I am off
Uh,
and turn somebody else
to
on.
to put this hat
I
on
have
to
to put a different hat
pretend.
on at work because that is that sounds really simple. That's an extraordinary amount of stress for people, and I can't emphasize that enough. When people have to be somebody they're not at work, you can do that for like a month, maybe. You
A
try
month.
that
I
for a
like that.
career, you're gonna feel like, why
Uh,
am I always burned out? It's because I'm trying to be somebody I'm not, at work all the time. And so it's important to find, organizations that resonate with who you are and resonate with your values. I'm not talking about just the mission of the organization. The mission can be anything, right? You could be selling widgets, it could be anything. As long as the values that get you to that end
mm,
goal resonate with your values, then that's going to feel like a lot
yeah.
better fit for you as a professional and as an executive and as a sales rep and as a marketer and as
All those.
a logistics professional. I mean, everybody, if they're tied into the values of the organization, they're going to function more fluidly.
Chris, it's a great transition. I think we'll use that leveraging because that for me that comes around purpose. And let's start our second half with that kind of
Right.
concept. But in the meantime, let's get you a question from the jar.
Oh boy! All right, pressure's
I'm
on.
going to reach in deep. I got something off the bottom that slipped out. I grabbed something else.
Oh no!
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a little foo-fooey. So here we go. Someone with an open and loving heart brings positive energy everywhere they go. Do you know somebody like that?
Someone
Someone
with
with
an
an
open and
open
loving
and loving
heart.
heart
Yes, I do know
brings
somebody like
brings
that.
positive energy everywhere they go.
I do know somebody like that. I do know somebody like that, and I'll tell you who they are. It's Linda Cohen, and,
Oh, oh,
and yeah, I'll tell you. I'm not afraid to say who it is because I
I
think it's
love it.
yeah. She is. Linda has carved out a career for herself that I think is just so inspiring. Linda, when her father passed away, she decided to write a book called "A Thousand Mitzvahs," and she's the Jewish faith, and so
Okay.
she she a mitzvah is you depending on your translation, but in the way she applied it, is a good deed. It's a good,
Yes.
so
Okay.
we did 1,000 of those, and she wrote a book about it, and it really, with the way she describes it, it didn't intend to be anything more than that, but it ended up being a career. She wrote a second book called The Economy of Kindness,
Oh,
and
goodness.
oh my gosh, I mean, it's just a phenomenal book. And she calls herself a kindness catalyst. She's a keynote speaker now. She goes around the world and she presents to huge organizations. She's been on news segments and
Oh,
so forth, but her focus is delivering kindness, not just being a cat. She calls herself a kindness catalyst. And I can't think of anybody that identifies with that particular statements on those
yeah.
cards other than Linda. There may be more. I'm sure there's other people going, well, Chris, you know me, right? But Linda, for sure, is the person that comes to my mind right away. Just has, because of the way she's practiced that over and over again, has such a grounded personality in being kind. And you think about you extrapolate what being kind means.
Yes.
She just
Yes.
embodies that, right? And she embodies that in a way that is not. Sometimes I think that we can interpret kindness as maybe a weakness at times, or maybe somebody
Oh,
who's just sort of a little bit of a pushover, somebody
I,
who's just sort of, but she's not.
yes.
She's not, and she's turned kindness into a strength in a way that I haven't seen many people do. And she's teaching people how to do that. And I think that's such a remarkable career.
It's interesting articulation, right? Turned it into a strength where you're right. It could be totally viewed as a weakness. And if
I
you
think I think the
apply it
temptation is to
wrong.
take it. Yeah, I think kindness feels like it's somebody who's just capitulating to everybody else, right?
Yes. Yes.
That's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
that's not, I don't think Linda would agree with that, right? I think that kindness is showing up strong for people, and
Yeah.
bring, people who may be struggling in some way or finding something that people need. And it takes a lot of strength to be kind. Uh,
Consistently,
Ironically,
for sure,
it yeah,
consistently.
absolutely. I think it takes a lot of strength to be kind. It takes a lot of strength when somebody comes to you and wants to maybe criticize you, and have a real compassion in that, and a real
Yeah.
empathy in that discussion. To this from sales, probably, right? I mean, when people come at you with
Yeah.
maybe a very difficult personality or a very attacking personality, to attack back just ends the conversation, right? It
Yeah.
just ends the dialogue, and sends you away. But being kind in that scenario disarms people. It
It
gives
can be
it,
disarming.
yeah, it'd be disarming, I think. And so I think I've learned that from Linda, right? In terms of the just the extraordinary power of just being kind. Uh,
It probably wins in the end,
I
right?
think
It's
so.
one of it's like is a long like a depth of strategy. That's a foundational strategy, and you're gonna win in the end.
Yeah, you could almost call that a value, right? You could be, you could
It's
put a corporate value of kindness, and I think that would go a long way, right?
what the guest I just had on earlier, Jim. I was talking about Jim, and he's got the four disciplines of execution, and the last one is
Mm,
accountability. And we
mm,
spent a bit of time talking about this. And so, you'd said strength, kindness sounds like a weakness, but actually, what we kind of talked about today on that one was, you know, it's a kind thing to do to hold somebody accountable, to make them a better person, to hold
yeah,
them up to the values and the standards that they can achieve, or you believe in them to a certain way. And to do that in a kind way, right,
yeah.
is a powerful thing. So you can see all the applications of kindness. It's even though it
Oh,
looks
yeah,
like you're,
absolutely.
instead of being, sometimes accountability sounds terrible. If it's applied wrong, it can be, not a nice thing. But if you do it in a kind way, it's a supporting way, it could be very powerful.
Yeah, and sometimes the kindness of accountability doesn't feel like kindness initially, right? It feels like,
Oh,
I think when it actually is, I think that,
it's so and it can actually that can actually when you said that, I had a different thought, which is that someone's coming from a place of real love, right? They're being kind to you and
yeah,
they're holding you accountable.
well,
I mean, that
that,
feels
that,
worse than not doing it. That feels worse than your own self-criticism because someone
yeah,
believes in, I believe in you and I'm doing this in the kindest way possible to implore you to be the person you can be.
yeah. And I think that I have a philosophy about that. I think that, when you do the work of developing trust with people, it gives you some license to
Ah,
be direct. You
so
know,
true. So
when
true.
you do the work of developing trust and developing, when people know that you care about them, they know it without a shadow of a doubt. You've purchased some goodwill
Yes,
to then be
interesting.
very direct with people. Now, I think that sometimes in business cases where you just don't have the time and you need to drive success in something, I think it's good to, to buy that goodwill very quickly by asking permission
Okay.
to be direct with people and holding them accountable and say, hey, can I do you would it be okay if I gave you some feedback right now?
Right. Yeah.
Asking
Some
permission.
direct feedback. Right.
Otherwise, I think it's, doing the work of, and so I think, intentionally being somebody who builds credibility throughout the organization gives you the light. I mean, throughout the organ, building credibility
Yeah.
throughout the organization with everybody you encounter gives you the license to hold people accountable in a way that you might not otherwise be able to. If you're not viewed as somebody who's credible and you then try to hold
Yes.
people accountable, that just falls on deaf ears fast. There's nothing. I can't think of anything more irritating.
Yeah, actually, that's really annoying, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that is really annoying. But if you are really consistent and you got a genuine heart, you're kind, if people will take it, they'll take it to heart.
So accountability is a core value of mine personally. I'll say this little tidbit. You can identify your core values by things that irritate you. If something somebody does irritates you, then you can stop and say, okay, that's a core value of mine speaking to me. That's something that's important to me. You don't have to act against that person in your irritation. You can stop and have some reflection and say,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
that's a core value of mine speaking to me, right? So when I come across people who are making excuses for why they weren't able to do what they were meant to do, excuse making to
I
me, and I'm also very sensitive to the idea when I want to explain something that happened, I feel like I'm making an excuse. So I catch myself all the time saying, this is going to sound like an excuse and I don't mean it to be, but this is what happened, and
but
so because
here's my excuse.
yeah, but it's yeah, but it's a core anyway. For whatever that's worth, I like to say that to people because I think some people, uh, who may be hearing this podcast may not know how to identify what their core values are, and that's one
Yes.
way of
Yeah.
doing it is understanding. Hey, if somebody shows up late and that really grinds at you, man, that's something that you can say, oh, okay, well, punctuality is a core value of mine.
Yeah, I like
Right?
that because I think you're right. People may not truly understand what a value for them is, what a core value. And I like that. Something really gets under your skin. You're like, oh, that matters to me.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, make a
Now you
note.
know, right? Now and things that you do intentionally and maybe even just subconsciously as you act throughout your day,
Yes.
I'm probably expressing some of these core values throughout and try to recognize it's about learning who you are as a professional. I'd say there's maybe one of the most important things you can do as a young professional is find out who you are, right? What makes you
What-
tick?
Yeah.
What drives you? And that's not an easy answer, right? To me,
No.
I was really lucky to be in HR because I took copious amounts of assessments. I, got lots of feedback and, being around people who challenge you is
Yes.
a real gift. As a young
Yeah.
professional, it may not feel like a gift, but it really is because it really drives to, you start to realize what motivates me, what are my motives, why do I do
Yes.
the things I do, you start answering those questions, you start finding out who you are as a professional, and you can really navigate your career more adeptly. um, It's
Let's
probably off
talk a little.
topic that I wanted
Yeah,
to.
no, it's great. It's great. I love the conversation. Very natural.
Yeah,
Let's talk a bit about we kind of right at the halfway mark. We kind of talked a little bit, started to get into that purpose part
yeah,
and aligning, the values as the company values come down, and if there's such a disassociation, you're probably in the wrong place. And then
yeah,
the more that you look at the values of the company and the mission statement and everything, and you start to, you get the warm and fuzz. You get one is you get it, you understand it, you see the goodness in that for what the company's trying to achieve, and you've got some alignment. You maybe even can go so far as to it's something that you care about. Hopefully, you end up in roles like that in life,
yeah. That's
and
right.
and I think when you're able to bring your own values in and there's some purpose and there's alignment, you do end up in a kind of a potential to flourish, right? To really thrive in an environment,
Yeah.
in a
So
company. And then the company, if it's providing that kind of clarity all the way through, all the way down, all the way across and all the way down, then that the chance the company's going to flourish and do really well. Um,
that's right.
have you seen this? I think, like as we said, you don't get called into companies that are flourishing per se. You get called into ones that are a little bit, as I was describing it yesterday. You when you open up the garden, about half the garden's all brown and wilted.
Yeah,
It's not,
right.
and
Yeah,
only a few of them are flowering. And
yeah,
they're all supposed to be flowering, but half of them are not green but brown, and there's no hope of them flowering.
right.
And these are the companies you get caught into. What have you seen when you've left? When you have you seen those flourishing? Have you seen
Oh
those moments
gosh,
where
absolutely.
everything
It's remarkable.
clicks? And what does that look
Remarkable.
like?
When you start to bring when you tie together people's passion
Hmm.
and their engagement and their intention on the areas that serve the organization well, then you inevitably what happens is revenue. you know,
Yeah,
so, I mean,
then everybody's happy.
that sounds really, but inevitably that's
Yeah,
what happens. But what happens
yeah.
in between engagement and revenue is this synergy where everybody feels excellent about the
Oh
work
yeah.
they're doing, and and people come. So you don't have people that walk through the proverbial door at work going, "Oh my gosh, another day!" Right? They're coming to work engaged, excited about the next step of the inevitable strategy that they're a part of now. That they feel
Yes.
engaged to contribute to, and so. For one particular organization, I was with a large manufacturing organization. They had a few retail outposts, and one of them was just really struggling. They weren't there was no it wasn't profitable at all, and they had kind of given up and said, well, this is just a marketing tool. This is just going to be people pass through, they're going to see our name, and okay, they signed a 10-year agreement to be in that spot. They weren't getting
Okay.
out anytime
Yeah.
soon, so they were like, okay, we've sunk costs, just forget it, this is where we're at. I mean, not the executives hadn't necessarily thrown up their arms and said they wanted it to be profitable, but it just wasn't.
Yeah.
And so what it came down to, they had tried every, and we talked about this earlier in our, maybe I can't remember if it was a recording or now, but
Yeah.
they had tried the finance and operations metrics and trying to dial those in to see what if that would. Nothing was driving profitability. What we did is we looked at, okay, the leadership structure of this particular outpost. It was misaligned and it wasn't serving the needs of the workers there.
Okay.
And this was a more targeted focus on this one location. Uh, but once we fixed the platform by which employees were communicated to, and how they were led, and how they were managed and treated, right? Not that anybody was intentionally treating anybody badly. They weren't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was misaligned. And once we got that into alignment, after just a short analysis and saying, okay, what looks out of what, where are the people alignments not situated.
Okay.
Once
Yes.
in 6 months, it was profitable, and it had been, it was just, it turned like that. And so, yes, it worked. When you look at how people are experiencing work and how they are being interacted with and how they feel tied into the success of the company,
Yes.
I don't think enough executives, and I say this with a grain of salt because I don't know I've done
Yes.
a proper survey of this, but I, your individual contributors want to understand your business. They want to
Uh,
understand your
y-
business. And I don't know that a lot of executives really uh, think that way. They think that, okay, they have this job that begins at 8 a.m. and ends at 5 p.m. and it's very finite in nature, and the scope is not very large with respect for the entire organization as a whole. But they want to understand the business and they want to understand how their activities are driving success. And when they start getting tied into that, holy cow! I mean, that's you know you do that at scale, it is a
you do it.
different experience. It is a different organization. Um, yeah.
As you were saying that, I was grabbing people, not watching if you're listening to it, I was kind of, rustling around trying to find this book. And because as you were describing this, people really do. I 100% agree with and I've
Yeah.
had this conversation before about people, everybody in the role, everybody at work, no matter what their role is, seeing how they contribute to the bigger picture. And it's so important, right? Otherwise, no one's having fun. Um, I've been working with a company called Shape, and
Mm.
you said the words, which is employee experience,
Yeah.
which is what they do. They're one of the employee experience measurement companies,
Oh, good.
um,
Yeah.
and it's a new company. They're just getting ready to launch, and there's science behind it. I've just been fascinated talking to the CEO Ali Khan about how they've put everything together, and it's employee experience, and they help companies get to flourishing. And obviously that's done by talking to the employees and finding out where you're at today and what are the gaps and what are the tools you can do to kind of fulfill that. And as I explained, we had a client, and I'm kind of repping them. I'm kind of using them with some of my clients because I'd like to work with a company that wants to know where they're at. And then we talk about what are the gap, here's a real good tool to measure where you're at, and let the employees tell us where they think you're at, because they're the ones that do the work of, you think of the ideas and they're the ones that are actually doing it. But I articulated this to a client, and I said, basically, they measure four parts of the business. And the first one is the individual that shows up and how they're showing up. So that includes the whole person. So,
Yes.
here you've got this person that shows up to work, not just the tip of the iceberg, but the whole enchilada, right?
Right.
Their mental health, their physical health, their engagement. And then they measure, I call it the playground that you build. So you got to invite all these kids to school, and now you build a playground for them. All
Yeah.
right, that's your workplace. What does a workplace look like? What are those tools, those soft and hard tools that you've got? And then it's their experience in this environment. And so the way they show up as people and what you tell them, they have this experience and on the playground. And then it's the last one is my favorite one. And I called it your vision and your commitment to it.
Mm.
And that's your culture and the tools that you give people. So it's
Right.
it's that articulation of what like, if you've
Right.
communicated the vision, are you really that serious? Because I'm out here in the store, out here in the boondocks, and we never see our manager. We don't really have any great articulations on this.
Yeah.
And so you find out that actually you're not that committed to your vision. And
Right.
so people they don't care. They give up, and there's no alignment.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just love that. I love that articulation of, the person who shows up, what's the playground look like?
Yeah.
How do they enjoy recess?
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
a great illustration of
that,
how culture is aligned from point A to point Z, right?
yeah.
And
And
yeah, so that's exactly right. And so yes, that this to answer your original question, this drive. assessing how your employees are engaged, and how they, engaged is sort of become a
Yeah,
cliche word these
yeah,
days, but it's sort of played out, but it's still a real phenomenon, and so I don't like to lose sight of real words with real definitions, because they've been, overused by our society. But there is in fact a real measurable way to see if your employee.
for
You can do
engagement.
surveys. You know, it's observable, right? When your employees feel tied into the strategy of the organization, and they bring, to your point, in shape is bring their whole selves to work every day, engage with all their faculties, right?
Yeah.
To help drive success through their contribution, their assigned contribution. And when they see their activities and they understand how their activities are driving success for the organization, yeah,
Hmm.
they're gonna enjoy their role a lot more. They're probably not going to spend the day that you're paying them for looking for another job, right? Because that's the other side of it.
Th-
If you're not
Interesting.
driving that, those types of intentional, um, intentional culture markers, then yeah, people are going to come to work. They're going to feel like, I don't really feel like I'm home here. I don't feel like I'm a part of anything that's really keeping me excited. I don't
Yes.
understand how my work is driving success. So what I'm going to do is get on the internet and look for another job. And that's for the
So
lion's
it's
share of time what'll
com-
happen.
yeah, the commitment and engagement, right? There's two things that are kind of the same, but you can have one without the other.
Yeah.
Well, I just got balloons
That is
somehow.
so funny how these how our devices now will
I
they'll have
don't
a
know.
response to our our what are these gestures we do. Now, if you do a
Yeah,
thumbs
I
up,
thought it might have been a gesture,
yeah,
and it
you
might have
get
been
a.
because
Are you on a Mac by any chance, Ken?
I'm on a Mac.
Yes. So Macs have these really great now gestures you can do. That if you do a thumbs up, you'll get a thumbs up marker on your
I
screen. Typically, well, sometimes you do, but yeah.
Yeah, I
Anyways,
don't know. It was happening to me on Zoom, and I thought it was a Zoom feature,
no,
and
I
now
think it's
I'm
a Mac.
on.
I think it's Mac.
It must be a Mac feature because
Yeah.
we're on a different platform, and
Yeah.
I just got balloons. So,
Yeah.
boy, for those of you listening, whatever I said was a celebratory balloon event
That's right. That's
or
right.
a hand gesture.
We've had a great discussion. That was what it was
I think
signifying for
that's
us,
I
Ken.
think that's what it was saying. It was it's a
Yeah.
great this is a great chat.
Yeah.
Um, I think let's pull another question. We're at a good spot to pull a
Yeah.
question.
Sure.
We've talked. Boy, it's almost been an hour already, Chris.
Yeah. It's good. It's time
Like
flies.
that's really time flying. Okay,
Yeah.
so I got your second question here. Let's see if I
Sure.
pull another safe. Let make sure I can pull a safe, not safe for work card. I'll explain to you later. Well, you
Yeah.
remember the title of the book.
Yes, I
Uh,
do. Yeah.
okay, so you can
Yeah.
get the idea that some
Yeah.
words are not some words are not safe for
Yeah.
these kind of chats.
That's all
Um,
right.
okay, so beautiful one. Can love be felt through the touch of a hand?
Yeah. For sure. That's yeah, I think obviously, if I'll start from workplace. I'm in HR, of course, so
Yeah,
I'll
careful.
start there. But of course, in the workplace, you want to make sure before you touch anybody that people are feel safe with that, and feel comfortable with
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
interaction, because people have any. The one thing about, I'll digress and come back to that.
Okay.
People, one thing to know about culture in organizations is and inclusion, really, is that we
Hmm.
all come from a variety of backgrounds, and we all experience life from a different. We all have different experiences in our lives that shape our view of the world and how
Yes.
we see the world, right? A lot of that happens from age 1 to 5, or 0 to 5, actually. But
Yeah.
beyond that, even within our own families, right? And you have a different experience and have widely different opinions about very critical topics. But you think about the range of opinions you have, maybe in your family unit,
Y-
and or relatives you have. Now think about people coming together in a workplace from all over the place. I mean, it is a mishmash of different experiences, and how their experiences have shaped how they experience the world, and so
Yes.
it takes a lot of empathy for everybody to feel included and feel
Yeah.
as everybody wants to. So, but to your question, can love be felt through the touch of hand? And absolutely, I think that all of our senses, right? Seeing, hearing, smelling, everything, a touch of a hand is real. Can be a very
Mm.
gentle, calming, especially when somebody's going through a very, very difficult time. Just putting a hand on their hand and just knowing them, hey, I'm here, right? I'm present.
Another
Uh,
human.
I don't, you don't owe me anything more than just me being here and being a comfort at the moment, right? If you're going through a terribly difficult time.
Yeah.
So I think, that's one example, but in a number of ways, yes, love can be felt through a touch of a hand for sure.
Great question for me. It was good. It was a question that had a lot of meaning for me during part of my journey. It was a question that kept coming up
Mm.
in these interesting spots, and
Wow. Yeah. Cause you travel the world
uh,
and,
yeah,
uh, gosh. Yeah.
and I had one where it really felt like somebody was sending a message from the other side
Mm.
with that question. And
Yeah.
I interviewed somebody who had lost their mother um, through a rare brain cancer. And it
Mm.
turned out that the interview that day that I interviewed that person was the birthday of a friend of mine who his daughter had died of the same brain cancer.
Wow.
And
Oh,
so it was a really, and that person had pulled that card about 10 days before that as a single card out of the jar.
mm.
And so for that question followed me for a couple more days and then presented itself in a story way. And I sent him a message and he said, "Today's her birthday."
Mm.
And the fact that I had pulled that card, his card, her card on the same day, and it was somebody who had died of this a rare brain cancer. So there was a kind of a message in there for me that
Yeah. Life is
sometimes we're not
beautiful, but
there's a
life is
few
hard.
dimensions to the
Yeah. Yeah. That's
there's
right.
a few dimensions to this world that we may not be totally
Yeah. I
attuned
mean,
to.
there's a lot to, how we experience life and how we experience, past, people who passed on. And yeah, I think that there's a lot there, there's a lot
People have
there,
moved through
more than we understand. Yeah.
more than we understand, more
Yeah.
than we understand. Um, how about maybe some closing thoughts, Chris, on some just maybe I'll give you a couple of prompts, and one is just that how do you see the future in this? Now that we talked a little bit about the mass resignation, you're talking a
Mm.
little bit about the layoffs that are coming and happening now in big companies, and people with a sense a different they're going to come back to work. So
Yeah.
either they're returning from their own self-inflicted layoff or they're going to be laid off and come back to work and look for a new career.
There's a
What do you
lot.
think
There's a
employees are
lot.
going to look
Yeah.
how
Hey, Ken, did I lose you? I think there was I lost you for a second, Ken. Are we back?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
I've got a little bit of a funny connection.
That's all right. That's good. But I could definitely dive into that. So the future of work and the workplace and workplace culture, all that stuff. So
Yeah.
there's a few dynamics. I mean, there's a changing of technology. There's a changing of I'll talk about the layoffs recently. I think the tech layoffs have come and they've impacted the workforce to some extent. I think some of them. I think what we've learned is that um, I've had to conduct layoffs myself. I mean,
Mhm.
I've with one company I probably did uh, one experience. I did 200 individual layoffs, like in front of 200 individuals, and not a group of people, but individually, right? So I've done this. I know what it feels like. I
Oof.
know on the HR side, I know how
Yeah.
these things are orchestrated, and I know when they're done well, and I know when they're not done well, right?
Mm.
And I think for the large in my assessment, my opinion, I think that when the layoffs in the tech companies kicked off, you could tell that they were not very well orchestrated and not very well organized. And that's unfortunate because people's lives are impacted. I think, but that's come and gone. That put a lot of people into the job market that are now looking for jobs. I think that's one thing that there's now. We had the Great Resignation. Now we have what I might say. I think I've seen it coined as the Great Rehire or something. I mean, it's like there's so many people in the job market now that are looking for work, and but that's now. So in the future, there's a couple things. So there's artificial intelligence that's come on the scene. I think that there's a lot of fear surrounding, is artificial intelligence going to put people to work? And my answer to that is no, it's not. And I don't think so. Right? I think it's so you and I have been around. We've seen the computer age, right? And seen, we've seen technology after technology enter the workforce. And every time there's a new technology or a bit of a disruption, people freak out. Oh my gosh, everybody, no, it's not. It's a tool, right? And people are going to learn how to use that tool, and they're going to be more efficient, as we always have.
That's it.
That's it. And so the other thing is, this is a staggering statistic. 60% of all companies that have employees, 60% of all companies that have employees are owned by somebody who is 60 years or older. 60, I'm going to say that again. 60% of all companies that have employees are owned by somebody who is 60 years or older. So there is going to be a big transition of ownership of organizations in this country. And I can't tell you exactly how that's going to affect the job market, but it's going to affect the job market. There's going to be a shift that I think that's, people are talking about AI. That's not the shift to look at. The shift to look at is this extraordinary transition of organizational ownership from one generation to the next.
This is generational shift, which will bring all kinds of interesting changes.
Yeah, and I think it'll be fine. I think it's going to be, but there will be a change, and I haven't really wrapped my head around exactly what that change is going to be. But that's something that people should be talking about. That is a topic that I think is more tangible, is more reticent, and more real than I think. Look, I think AI, that's going to affect the way people do work. But I think the bigger impact on our economy is going to be, do we have enough people in our workforce that are capable of running a business? To take over that number of businesses.
60%.
Yeah, 60%. So that's a huge statistic and that's to me, again, if experts were going to be talking about something that's going to affect the workforce in the future, that's the topic to me.
Interesting. I will definitely try to find some people talking about that.
I think it's worth, who's talking about it right now, or the way I learned about that is financial planners, people that are,
they see it.
Yeah, they're helping these folks figure out what they're going to do with the companies.
What am I doing with my business?
And so those are the people that are talking about it right now, and nobody else is. I don't see it anywhere else. The only people that are talking about it are the people that are actually helping these people financially sunset their businesses. Not sunset, not close them, but succession plan their business and move their life into the next stage of retirement or next endeavor they may choose to pursue. But succession planning that extraordinary number of businesses is going to be
this is a whole podcast in itself, probably.
Oh, I think so.
Just to go diving into
it's a good question. I hope that was a good answer.
Yeah, that was great. Well, I didn't expect to end the conversation on transitioning businesses and the ownership changes. Chris, awesome conversation. Really want to thanks a bunch for spending time on your Tuesday morning and sit down and share your experience.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. Been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening and supporting the Humanist, the jar works that we do. And really just this idea that it's going to be a different workplace. Now it already is a different workplace, at least in minds of most employees. They are looking for something different. You've got to we've got to meet employees where they are, especially when it comes down to trying to help them understand what they do, why they do it, how it's important. And overall, in the end of the day, this helps the organization, right? It does, as you eloquently said before, this ends up showing up, and ultimately this all ends up showing up in sales or revenue,
Yeah, that's right.
right? It really does. Chris, thanks so much. And whoops, I got my phone's ringing. I got everything going. People love
Yeah,
me. Um, just I'll hang that up. So thanks again. Hang around for 20 seconds, and I'll see you on the other
yeah,
side.
absolutely. You bet.
Okay, let me see. Let me find my little exit commercial. Thanks again, everybody, for listening and supporting the Humanist. Welcome to the Humanist Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Stearns. Join us on a journey where we unravel the